Over the past 12 episodes, we've seen how the Catholic Church built Western civilization. But where is Western civilization going? What's next? What can we do about it? Join me today for the Catholic Church, Builder of Civilization. Welcome to the Catholic Church, Builder of Civilization. I'm Thomas Woods. This is our last episode. So let's take a moment and take stock of what it is that we've seen thus far. Because I think when you put it all together, it's a pretty impressive package for the Catholic Church after all. For instance, we went after the subject of science right away, because there I think people are most likely to disparage the Church or to think not especially well of her, that she has not distinguished herself very well when it comes to science. But to the contrary, we've seen that modern historians of science, who would know something about this, they do this for a living, are now no longer saying that about the Catholic Church, that she's just an enemy of science. We've actually seen that the Church, in fact, introduced into our civilization critical ideas that made it possible for science to develop. In fact, it's not just a coincidence that science developed in a largely Catholic milieu, in a world that was formed by Catholic ideas, but rather it makes perfect sense, as we saw earlier. Beyond that, we looked at great priest scientists whose names have been forgotten, but who achieved great things in the sciences. And at that time I urged people, and I renew that urge today, to consider learning more about and even writing about the Jesuit scientists. These people accomplished so much in the sciences, it's absolutely astonishing, and yet no book about it? That is an injustice, my friends. Let's hope that it's rectified. Or how about charity? We all know the Catholic Church does great charitable work. But do people realize how great it is? Do people realize that there was nothing like Catholic charity in the ancient world in terms of the amount of charity that was done or the spirit in which that charity took place? Nothing like it. The idea that I'm going to give something to someone purely out of a desire to help that person, with no self-interest involved, but simply out of love. This is a revolutionary idea, but we take it for granted, don't we? When we hear that somebody's been charitable, that's exactly what we think about, that the person did something without any thought for his own welfare, but did something solely to help somebody else. We think of that as being charity. But why does that come naturally to us? Why do we think of that as charity? Well, it's because we live in a civilization that still bears the residue of its Catholic influence. If we were living in ancient Greece and Rome, we wouldn't have these ideas about charity. So people go through life thinking this way about charity, never even knowing that it's their Catholic inheritance that has given them those ideas. Well, we should point that out, shouldn't we? But then there's the university system. Who gave birth to the university system in the High Middle Ages? The Catholic Church. Who made that possible? Who fostered it? Who protected it? And who encouraged the kind of vigorous, rational debate that occurred within the precincts of the university? Of course, it was the Church. In fact, the Church encouraged the asking of questions. The whole tradition of scholasticism consists of asking questions and being certain that recourse to both authority and reason can resolve these questions. There was a confidence in the cathedral school at Chartres and in a great many other Catholic thinkers that God had not given us our rational natures in vain, but He intended us to use them. We should use our rational nature. We should use our reason to understand the world around us, and that reason properly applied will not mislead us. We've also seen that the idea of rights comes out of the Catholic Church too. Now this, for a long time, has been assumed to be a teaching that comes from secular thinkers or non-Catholic thinkers at the very least, perhaps in the 17th century, little before, little after. But we've seen that in fact the idea of rights, natural rights, rights that inhere in us as human beings naturally, rights that mean that you can't invade my person, you can't kill me, you can't steal from me. These things that inhere in us as human beings, these ideas developed out of the Catholic Church and her own canon lawyers. And here I rely on an important book by Brian Tierney, who's one of the great experts on the idea of rights. He has a great book called The Idea of Natural Rights. And it's there where you see the most systematic refutation of the idea that rights just came out of nowhere in the 17th century. He shows that they came out of the heart of the Church. Now, we've also seen that international law comes out of the Catholic Church too. International law, which is closely related to the idea of rights, comes out of the Catholic Church. Because international law says that some countries don't have more rights than others, but that each state has an equal dignity, regardless of whether the ruler of that state is Catholic or non-Catholic. If his only crime, so to speak, is being non-Catholic, you can't just depose him for that, because his state has dignity and the right of self-government just the way as any Catholic state would have, or state populated by Catholics. So international law, the idea there's an absolute moral standard that governs the interaction of states. Where does this come from? It comes from the Catholic Church with Francisco de Vitoria and Francisco Suarez and de Soto and all these other thinkers. Even law itself, law domestically, is indebted to the Catholic Church because the canon law was the first modern legal system in Europe. Because for the first time, church law was brought together systematically and presented in a coherent whole, where all contradictions that might have existed have been reconciled. That's what modern states in Western Europe did when they were developing their own legal systems. They used the model of canon law as to how you go about doing that. Now, in our first episode, I made brief mention of the study of economics. Now, economics really is an interesting science, so I don't want to hear any objections to economics. But economics is often thought to have emerged in the 18th century. In the 18th century, sort of deistic thinkers, or thinkers who certainly weren't Catholic, just suddenly came up with the idea of economics, just kind of poured out of their heads. But in fact, that's not what historians today are saying. For the past half century, historians who write about the history of economic thinking are now saying that it's not Adam Smith in the 1770s who just gave birth to economics, just came all out of his gigantic head. But instead, they're now pointing to a people called the late scholastics, who were Spanish thinkers. Well, they weren't all Spanish, but the best ones were Spanish. So all you Spaniards out there, congratulations. As the source of modern economic thought, the late scholastics are really the source. One of the great 20th century economists, Joseph Schumpeter, said, "It is they who come nearer than does any other group to having been the founders of scientific economics." And there's been much scholarship written about this ever since Schumpeter wrote in the 1950s. Modern historians of science have continued to uncover the critical and important insights into economic thought of these people. For example, Raymond de Roover, Marjorie Grice Hutchinson, and scholars who are still alive like Alejandro Chafuin and Harry Verizor at the University of Detroit. This is an important contribution as well. Now let me give an example of what I mean here. In the 16th century, when precious metals coming from the New World began to reach Europe, people noticed that prices rose. So what they recognized was there was a kind of a fixed cause and effect relationship going on here, that there was a relationship, some kind of a relationship, between the level of prices and the amount of money. So in effect, this was like an economic law. So they understood scientifically that there were relationships at work in the world of economics. This is an essential breakthrough. They also wrote great moral treatises relating to economics, like Juan de Mariana wrote a fantastic treatise denouncing inflation, when governments inflate the money supply and thereby make each unit of money worth less. He denounced this as a terrible, inexcusable crime. Kings used to call in the coins in their realm and then clip them and save some of the metal and then return the coins to the people. And of course, he's gained an awful lot for himself, and they're stuck with these crummy coins they have to exchange at the old value. Juan de Mariana denounced this because he understood the economics behind it. Now, how did this go unheralded for so long? Why for so long did we all think Adam Smith had a gigantic head? Like, why did we think this? In part, it's because the people who wrote this stuff, the late scholastics, they didn't write books on economics for the most part. They wrote great moral treatises. And in the course of their moral treatises, they referred to economic topics, but they never had a book that said, here's our stuff on economics. So it was easy to overlook it. In addition, they wrote in Latin, and by and large, scholars today, particularly in economics, are not known for reading Latin. And so this was simply forgotten. And only now are we digging it out and saying, Catholics did this too. It's unbelievable. So I would say that we put this all together, and we haven't even talked about art and architecture. I assume that's taken for granted. The Catholic Church built Western civilization. And yet, not to beat a dead horse here, but this is one dead horse that amply merits a substantial beating. The European Union Constitution refuses to acknowledge the Catholic inheritance. Not a word. Western civilization comes from the ancient world, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and that's it. And whatever happened in between, nobody really knows, couldn't possibly have been very important. Seriously, only an imbecile could believe this now, given all the evidence that's out there. But this is what we're told by the European Union. And it can't just be ignorance. It isn't just that they're dummies and they haven't done their reading. It can't be that. Because nobody who would presume to make a statement officially on behalf of the European Union could be that uneducated. It's frankly because of hostility toward the Church. There is a hostility toward the Church. We all know it. And in fact, this colors people's statements and judgments. They don't want to give the Church credit for things. My own theory is that one of the reasons a lot of secular intellectuals despise the Church is that the Church, in effect, reproaches them for their immoral lifestyles. They don't like being told they're not supposed to do this and that, and every time they see the Church, it's a reproach to them. And so therefore they have to wipe it out, they have to destroy it, they have to ignore it. But we refuse to go away, don't we? We refuse to go away. Well, after the break, we're going to talk about the state of Western civilization right now. Look around at the art world a little bit, the state of things, and see what, if anything, we can do about this. And what can we do to take this knowledge and spread it out there to the world? I wrote a book called How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, because I hoped it could help to spread this knowledge among the general population. Let's see what else we can try to do to make people aware of what an extraordinary treasure the world has in the Catholic Church. Supernaturally, yes, but even on a natural level, all the glorious things she's done. How do we spread that around? Let's talk about that after the break, and we'll see you in just a minute.